In January 2025, the FDA proposed substantially limiting the level of nicotine permitted in cigarettes and certain other combustible tobacco products. The proposal is expected to face strong industry opposition, and its future is unclear. I'm Stephen Morrissey, managing editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, and I'm talking with Patricia Zettler, a professor of law at The Ohio State University Moritz College of Law. Professor Zettler has co-authored a perspective article about the proposed nicotine rule. Professor Zettler, could you briefly review the history of this rule? For how long has the FDA considered implementing limits on nicotine levels?
So FDA has considered these limits for quite some time. When Congress enacted the Tobacco Control Act, amending FDA statute to give FDA jurisdiction over tobacco products, Congress expressly said that FDA could issue a product standard for nicotine yields, and that was in 2009. The first time FDA announced interest in this kind of product standard was during the first Trump administration in, I want to say 2017. So about 8 years ago or so. So this is something that Congress envisioned when it first enacted the law giving FDA authority here. And FDA itself has been thinking about for quite some time.
And then what are the specific terms of this proposed rule?
So, in short, what the rule would do is limit the amount of nicotine that people who smoke cigarettes are exposed to. And it would do that by capping the amount of nicotine that is permitted in the tobacco that's in cigarettes and certain other combustible products. So, this in turn would mean that it would be easier for people to quit smoking, which the overwhelming majority of people who smoke say they want to do. And it would also make it less likely that young people who smoke would become addicted and continue to smoke throughout their lives. This is a big deal because smoking remains the leading cause of preventable death and disease in the United States, and it's addiction to nicotine that drives people to smoke and thus repeatedly expose themselves to the toxins in cigarettes that cause all of the health harms that flow from smoking.
What is the goal of targeting nicotine in particular rather than the other substances in cigarettes? Is it that addictive quality?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is that addictive quality because it is addiction to nicotine that leads people to smoke more, to continue to smoke, and to repeatedly be exposed to the toxins in cigarettes and other combustible tobacco products that cause all of the health harms we all are familiar with now that come from tobacco products.
So then what are the effects that the rule is projected to have on both the smoking rates and health outcomes?
So, in terms of the effects the rule is expected to have, they are really enormous. It's difficult to think of another public health regulation that would save as many lives as this rule would if it were finalized. If finalized, it's estimated that the rule would save millions of lives during this century and would also provide trillions of dollars of benefits. But for the New England Journal of Medicine audience, I think it's the lives saved that is really compelling.
You say in your article that legal pushback to the rule is expected. On what grounds are tobacco companies expected to challenge it?
I think one reason legal pushback is expected is that we know from decades of experience that the tobacco industry is litigious, right? So we expect when there is regulation in the tobacco space that there will be litigation regardless of the strength of the government's legal arguments. Here, we expect a few kinds of arguments based on the statutory language giving FDA authority to issue this rule. So, as I mentioned, the Tobacco Control Act that was enacted in 2009 by Congress expressly gives FDA authority to issue a product standard for nicotine yields, so long as FDA doesn't require reducing nicotine to zero. So one argument we expect that industry may advance is that this rule is contrary to that prohibition on FDA reducing nicotine to zero. Now, we think that's not a very good argument. The statute only prohibits FDA from reducing nicotine to zero, and the level that FDA has proposed is quite clearly not zero. FDA has proposed capping the level of nicotine permitted in tobacco filler at 0.7 milligrams per gram of tobacco. So 0.7 obviously is not zero, but also importantly, FDA looked at research about this level of nicotine in cigarettes and The level is measurable in the products. Nicotine is measurable in the people who use these products. So whatever way you cut what zero means, it's clear that this level is not zero.
Do you think these industry challenges would be likely to succeed or not?
I think under any fair read of the statute, FDA should win against these kinds of industry challenges. Now, we live in a moment of time where we know that a lot of challenges to government regulation or to public health regulation are coming in courts where litigants expect to have a judge who is friendly to the industry position. And so it's hard to know what will happen in courts, but I think FDA is on really strong legal footing here. And if the rule is finalized and if it is challenged, I think ultimately the agency absolutely should win a legal challenge.
Finally, what are the next steps for the proposed rule? You say in your perspective article that it's unclear whether the Trump administration will actually back the rule, which was released in the final days of the Biden administration. Has there been any indication of the new administration's stance on the issue?
There has not yet been any indication of the new administration's stance on this particular issue, at least not any express statements about this particular issue. Now, we wrote the perspective piece a couple of months ago. We're recording this podcast in April 2025, and I don't think I can talk about the future of the rule without talking about the layoffs that happened at FDA on April 1st, among many other changes that have happened in the past couple of months. FDA's Center for Tobacco Products, or CTP, was certainly not spared in those layoffs and reduction in force. Brian King, CTP's director, and other CTP leadership were forced out, as well as many CTP staff being fired in February and April. I don't know what that means for this issue specifically, but it doesn't give a lot of confidence that this new administration has the same commitment to the public health benefits of addressing the health harms of tobacco products that the first Trump administration did. Even in an environment where we are seeing this kind of upheaval at FDA and in public health regulation, I didn't actually talk to my two co-authors about this before recording the podcast, but I at least stand by our recommendation and the perspective piece that it would be incredibly useful for researchers to submit comments on the rule, shoring up the evidence for the path forward. I think it's important to create a public record of why this is the right thing to do. And if the storm passes, that will help a future FDA or even this FDA move forward. And it can also show, because public comments are a public record, can show industry, scientific communities, the American people, what the evidence really says here and what kinds of choices we'd like to see FDA make based on the best available scientific evidence.
Thank you, Professor Zettler.